Held captive by the Duke of Burgundy, she was treated not like a princess. There were no servants, the food was meager, and her room in Hainaut was always cold. Philip the Good, never trust historical nicknames, did everything he could to pressure her into relinquishing her rights to all her lands. This was yet another stroke of misfortune in the life of Jacoba of Bavaria, Holland, Zeeland, and Hainaut. All of these belonged to young Jacoba of Bavaria by birth. She was born on a hot July day in the year 1401 into one of the wealthiest families in Europe. To top it all off, her father was closely related to the English kings, while her mother came from a powerful line of Burgundian dukes. As the only child, Jacoba quickly became a coveted bride for dozens of princes. Naturally, with such a dowry, her parents could afford to choose her suitor, and they made sure to do so. At the age of 5, the red-haired little girl was betrothed to the second son of French King Charles VI. The real wedding between Jeanne de Valois and Princess Jacqueline, as she was called in her new homeland, took place in the year 1415, and the newlyweds divided their time between France and the Netherlands. However, the Burgundians, who by then had already seized a significant portion of France, were not willing to accept that Jacoba's vast lands would end up in the Valois family. They also laid claim to Holland and Zeeland, citing ancient laws that prohibited women from inheriting territories. A conflict was brewing. 15-year-old Jacoba understood that intrigues were swirling around her, but her life was filled with happiness, perhaps the first and last time in her short life. She enjoyed her time in France, got along well with Prince Jean, and soon became the heir to the throne. Her husband's older brother suddenly passed away, so Jean, now second in line, was proclaimed Dauphin. Jacoba's status changed dramatically. She was now the Dauphine of France. Her elderly father sent lavish gifts from Holland to his daughter's court, but by the time the carriages arrived in Paris, he was already dead. The bad news had preceded the gifts. As she looked at the magnificent fabrics, paintings, and jewels, Jacoba wept bitterly. But soon she would have to mourn not just her father. A year later, in Compiègne, her beloved husband, Dauphin Jean, died unexpectedly. Was it poisoning or a sudden illness? This could not be determined in the 15th century, and it remains unknown to this day. The 16-year-old widow returned to her hereditary lands, where she would face a difficult struggle for power. The truth is, the Burgundians had a point. In Hainaut, one of Jacoba's domains, land could easily be passed from father to daughter. However, in Holland and Zeeland, such laws did not exist. In these territories, the local nobility would have preferred to see Jacoba's uncle, John III, in charge. The young princess, lacking experience in governance and serious support, would struggle to maintain her power. She needed a husband. So, on the advice of her mother and her Burgundian relatives, Jacoba married Duke John of Brabant. Her uncle was not idle, either. He enlisted the help of the Pope, persuading him to annul the marriage since Jacoba and John of Brabant were closely related. Surprisingly, Rome, which had overlooked unions between aunts and nephews, granddaughters and grandfathers, opposed this marriage of cousins. The marriage was annulled, but then another pope reversed the annulment. Jacoba was anxious. Her position was precarious. And what about her husband? Unfortunately, Jacoba was not fortunate in this regard. Deep in debt, John of Brabant, instead of supporting his wife, signed a peace treaty with their enemy, transferring all of Jacoba's rights to her lands to John III for 12 years, in exchange for settling his debts. Upon learning of her husband's betrayal, Jacoba immediately prepared to leave. She had no desire to stay even a moment longer with such a useless and treacherous man. Soon after, she declared that as the heiress of Hainaut, Holland, and Zeeland, she considered her marriage to John of Brabant null and void. Jacoba left the continent to join her relatives in England. In London, Princess Jacoba was received like royalty. There were magnificent celebrations and feasts. King Henry V referred to her as his beloved cousin and casually inquired about French and Dutch affairs. He frequently sought advice from his brother Humphrey, which meant Jacoba often found herself in the company of this young and somewhat sullen man. Was she in love? Or did she simply enjoy conversing with him, feeling his support and protection? It remains unclear. But less than a year later, Jacoba of Bavaria became the wife of Humphrey, Duke of Gloucester, and was expecting a child. Rome confirmed her divorce from John of Brabant, so Jacoba no longer had to worry about that matter. Once again, misfortune struck. Jacoba was unable to carry her child to term. Her hereditary lands were under the control of her uncle's people. The princess proposed an audacious plan to her husband. He would use his troops to help her drive out her relatives, and in return, she would make him the governor of all her lands. Naturally, Humphrey of Gloucester agreed. In the autumn of the year 1424, the couple set off for Calais. On December 5th of that same year, the nobles of Hainaut joyfully recognized Humphrey as their lord. They managed to avoid a military confrontation with her uncle. John III died at the very beginning of the year 1425, succumbing to poison that had seeped onto his skin from a prayer book. Rumors circulated that it was Humphrey's clever scheme to ensure his wife could easily take possession of her lands. However, another stroke of bad luck befell the couple. Before his death, the cursed John named the Duke of Burgundy as his heir. As we know, the Burgundians were not ones to let go of their claims. No sooner had John passed away than their troops moved in on the disputed territories. Who could Princess Jacoba count on? Unfortunately, only herself. Humphrey of Gloucester, her third husband, returned to England. He was no longer interested in the war on the continent over Dutch lands, and it seemed Jacoba wasn't either. The abandoned princess was easily captured by the Burgundians. In the year 1427, Jacoba of Bavaria, the rightful heiress to vast territories, found herself a prisoner of Philip the Good. Her harsh imprisonment took a toll on the health of the unfortunate young woman. Morally and physically crushed, she agreed to sign papers that transferred her inheritance rights to the Burgundian. Once she regained her freedom, Jacoba accepted a marriage proposal from her former guard, Frank van Borselen, who was likely the first person to want nothing from her. Unfortunately, Jacoba had nothing left to give. The unfortunate princess, whose life had been a string of misfortunes, died of tuberculosis in the year 1437. After her miscarriage in England, she had no more children. As for her last husband, he never remarried, though he outlived Princess Jacoba by more than 30 years. But that's another story. If you like it, subscribe, like it, and thank you for your comments.